Now look where we are on our drop shoulder sweater. We have one joined piece instead of two separate ones to sew together later. And it's time to start the first sleeve. A sweater pattern usually has you make the sleeve from the bottom up and sew it to this armhole edge later. However, for plain stockinette sweater and even many patterns in knitting, the knitting looks very much the same whether you turn it upside down or right side up or downside, whatever. No matter which way you knit it, it looks about the same. And the easiest way is to pick up along this edge and knit the sleeve down. You know the number of stitches in the top of the sleeve from your pattern. That's the number of stitches you'll pick up evenly along this edge between the two markers that you put in earlier. You can count the number of rows between here and here, and for most sweaters you'll find that you have more rows than you have stitches to pick up, so you'll have to skip some. When it's time to pick up and knit the sleeve, use the needle that you used to knit the body, orient it toward you so that the right side is facing you, find your yarn marker and the end two stitches of your knitting, and you notice that there's like a channel, a line that runs right down between those two stitches. The first place that you're going to insert your needle is in the row that is marked right into that channel. Notice I picked up the end two loops, and I'm simply going to knit a stitch into that. Go right into the next hole in that channel. Again, you're picking up the whole, this is one whole stitch, and I'm picking that up. When it comes time to skip a stitch, then simply skip that one and go on to the next one. It will not make a hole. How often you skip depends on how many rows you have and how many stitches you have to pick up here. You continue this way all the way along, see what a nice edge that makes, all the way until you get to your other marker and you've picked up all the stitches you need for the top of your sleeve. As you knit a sleeve from the top down, decrease on the appropriate rows. Remember to make your decreases mirror images of one another. When we get to the cuff, decrease to the number of stitches we need. Follow the same number principle as you did for the bottom of the sweater. For example, you need an odd number of stitches if you're working a knit one, purl one rib. Be sure to bind off loosely in pattern. That is, knit the knits and purl the purls as you bind off. When you've completed one sleeve, do the other sleeve the exact same way. And this is what you have. 4 pieces joined together at the yoke instead of 4 separate pieces that you have to sew together later. And when we fold it over, we have only 2 major seams to sew. From the bottom of this body edge out to the sleeve on both sides. We'll start with this bottom rib and what's called a half stitch weave. Start by threading up a blunt tapestry needle. Blunt because you don't want to pierce any of your yarn, you simply want to work in between the strands. Once that's threaded up, look at the bottom of your cast on edge here. It's almost like a series of loops. And what I do is just sort of pretend that I go over here and make a pretend stitch. Catch 2 loops at the bottom of that very end cast on edge. Come back, go back into that same stitch you came out of. This yarn, by the way, was the yarn that was left over from the cast on. Now, come into, here's your very end knit yarn. Remember your knit stitch, excuse me. Go into the center of that knit stitch and come up in the stitch above it. Go back to this side, find the lower knit stitch, go into the center, come straight up above it. Once you get this particular seam established, it's easy to do because you always go into the hole you come out of. Go into the same knit stitch you came out of, lift up the next bar, right into the center of that stitch. You want to pull this snugly, but not real tight. You've got to have some flexibility because knitting is, after all, flexible. Always work back and forth from one side to the next. Always insert into the center of the knit stitch. When you get about 4 stitches or so, see how that's forming its own little knit stitch there? Kind of tug on it, make sure that you haven't gathered it up too much. This half stitch weave is very handsome on a 1x1 rib. You can't even tell that it's there. It just looks like another piece of the ribbing, another knit that's at the edge. You could use this all the way throughout the sweater and have really a handsome result. But I would like to show you a very similar kind of seam called a whole stitch weave, and it's especially useful when you have a color pattern. I added an extra color stitch at each end of this pattern so that when I put it together it would come out right. Also, you don't always have to use the yarn from the sweater to sew up. You can use embroidery floss that's of a similar color, and this is even a piece of tapestry yarn, needlepoint yarn, which is a very fine yarn. This is especially useful if you're working with a mohair or with some kind of blumpity-bumpity yarn. In order to work the full stitch weave, and I'm just going to start and leave that end hanging, we can work that in later, you insert into the channel between the end two stitches. This is the same place that you picked up that sleeve. Come over on this side of the work, find the end two stitches, insert in that first channel, and see that little bar that's there? Pick it up. Again, once you're rolling on this seam, you don't have to think anymore. Notice I don't pin anything. I don't have to. I'm going into the hole I came out of, come back to the other side, into the hole you came out of, lift up the bar. Into the hole you came out of, lift up the bar. And you continue this all the way up. When you get to the bottom of the armhole, you just turn the corner, work right down the sleeve. When you get to the rib at the sleeve, you again switch back to a half stitch weave, finish it off, and when you get to the very end of that sleeve ribbing, make another little loop like this one. Just sort of a squirrely little fake loop at the bottom, and it will finish it off. And then you've done everything except work in the ends. What we end up with is a sweater with almost invisible seams. Up here, of course, you can see the decreases from your sleeve, and a neck edge that needs finishing. The best tool to use for picking up and knitting the neck edge is a 16-inch circular needle. I like to start at the left shoulder, and there's this small section that was worked straight up to the shoulder that was not decreased. I start there by inserting right in that top stitch. I'll get this little string out of the way. This is the same place that you inserted when you were picking up and knitting the sleeve down. Just insert there and knit off the first stitch. For this straight section, pick up and knit one stitch for every row that you find along here. In my case, I had 4. When you get to the section that was decreased every other row, stop and look at what you have. You have this stitch coming all the way to the top. There it's decreased. Then a loop. Here's the next stitch that comes to the top, and another loop. As you pick up stitches here, insert into the center of that stitch, then pick up your next stitch here on that double loop, into the center of that stitch, then through that double loop, all the way down until you get to the front section that was bound off. When you get to the front bound off section, the very first bind off of the front neck edge, insert into the top of that stitch. It's actually almost the center of that stitch. For each stitch across, this is exactly the same way as you work across the back of the bound off neck edge. Continue across the front. If you had this on a holder, of course, you would have live stitches and could just knit into those. When you get to the other decrease section, insert into the center of each of those top stitches. Then the straight section into the rows, and across the back you do it just as you did here, inserting into the center of each top stitch. Now, when you've picked those all up, you need to adjust on the next row to the proper number of stitches. If you're doing a 1x1 rib, like I did, a knit one, purl one, you have to have an even number of stitches. Don't worry about picking up the right number of stitches the first time around. Instead, you can just increase or decrease to the number of stitches that you need on that very second row. After you complete the rib and you bind off, it's very important that you do it quite loosely so that you can get it over your head. You can even use a larger size needle here if you don't think you can get it loose enough on your regular ribbing needle. And one other little trick is when you get to the very last 2 stitches, instead of working them separately, work them together on your very last bound off stitch. Pull this yarn through, and when it comes time to finish off that edge, you make another one of those little fake loops. Here's my first bound off stitch. If I come and insert right under that and insert back into the center of this stitch, that was the last bound off one you have, you end up with a lovely little continuous edge that you can't even tell where you finished or ended. This is your rib that's been attached, very handsome line, and the only thing left to do is to work in the ends of the yarn. The easiest way to work in the ends is simply to turn the sweater inside out, and you will see that, besides being messy, all of my ends are in the seams. Every time I came to the end of a skein of yarn, or even if I found a knot in the yarn, I ripped it back to the beginning of the row, and I always start a new piece of yarn in the seam ends. Where there's a lot of color, I have lots of ends to work in. In order to work these in, you can use a tapestry needle again, but this time you can use one with a point. You don't care if you pierce the yarn, and we're going to individually work in these ends. I cut them to, anywhere from 3 to 6 inches. Thread up that tapestry needle and simply start working it into the seam allowance. You can work it from one side to another. I generally work about 1 inch in. It's okay if you pierce those threads, unlike when you're working a seam. And stop when you get about that far, tug down, and backstitch. Work it in for, maybe a total of 2 to 3 inches. And then you simply have to snip it off. That's one end done. I have another 40 to do because of the color work. But if you continue that, when you're finished, it looks like this. When you've worked in all the ends, you turn the sweater right side out, and this is what you have. An easily finished, good-looking sweater. Later, we're going to talk about the process of blocking, which is the very final step in making a sweater. But now we're going to go on to the other styles, starting with the set-in, so that you can see how the skills you learned on this sweater apply to them as well.